There's been a slight increase in homicides in New York City this year, 45 at this point last year. We're at 54 so far this year. And New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton says that the slight increase year to date compared to last year in New York City homicides can be blamed on legal marijuana. Legal marijuana, of course, Colorado and Washington. How does he explain this? This is what he said, quote, "The seemingly innocent drug that's been legalized around the country. In this city, people are killing each other over marijuana, more so than anything we've had to deal with in the 80s and 90s with heroin and cocaine. In some instances, it's a causal factor, but it's an influence in almost everything that we do here. We need to really break this thing down. First of all, we need to see if the year-to-date uptick holds through for the entire year, because we're only 2 months into 2015. Just because right now New York City is 9 homicides ahead of last year doesn't mean that at the end of the year they won't actually see a reduction in crime. But let's assume that it does for a second. The crime rate now is so much lower than it was 20, 25 years ago, for example. In 1990, there were over 2,200 murders in New York City at the time when marijuana, even medicinal or decriminalized, none of it was going on yet. Now we would be on track for somewhere under 400 murders in New York City. So that is being ignored. The fact that even though Colorado and Washington have legalized marijuana, we see drastically less murders in New York City than 25 years ago. But what do we actually know about the connection between legalizing marijuana and homicide? Homicides dropped 24% in Denver last year, the first full year of legalization in Colorado. Robberies were down 3%. Burglary was down 9.5%. The only crimes that went up were larceny, which is a property crime, not a violent crime, and arson, which seems very unlikely to be related to marijuana unless you believe that stoned kids are going around setting fires because they're stoned when they otherwise wouldn't. If we look at Seattle, there was an increase in homicides from 23 to 26, but again, that number is very, very small, and to attribute it to marijuana doesn't really seem to be based in evidence. What do you think, Lewis?
I think that we can't deduce anything from these murder numbers, first of all. And I think, secondly, that clearly we have here in the commissioner a man who is desperately trying to keep marijuana illegal because of the funding involved with his department and the war against drugs.
We know that in New York City, which is a huge police department, a significant amount of money comes from drug seizures, drug raids, enforcing the failed war on drugs policies. And we can go back to before legalization in Colorado and Washington. The anti-legalization advocates were already suggesting that legalization would lead to a huge increase in violent crime and murder and so on and so forth. And it has not. We've actually seen a decrease in Colorado, which is the place where right now we have the most comprehensive data. So that assertion has been rebuked. The only other thing I thought of is that when we think back to that 2-week period here in New York City, when police essentially stopped arresting people unless it was absolutely necessary in protest of Mayor Bill de Blasio, no violent crime epidemic took place. And you have to think, if the police are only arresting people when truly necessary, right? Homicides, violent crime, etc. If they're turning the other cheek to at least some of the drug trafficking and drug possession, and it doesn't lead to an explosion in violent crime in their own city, you'd think they would pay attention to that data.
Well, that data may not be important. This commissioner might not care about what's best for the city. He might only care about what brings in the money for his department.
You think it's really that corrupt and transparent, though?
I can't say with certitude. He might think that the legalization of pot would be a terrible thing for his community, but I think if he educated himself on it, he would realize that it's not.